In a time of political turmoil, where suspicion and fear reign, strangers enter the lonely rectory of a humble priest. Was it to entertain their hosts or to exploit their gullibility? As the chill of winter sets in, the grotesque situation forces the priest and his niece to make a hard decision to preserve their fragile peace and deal with the unexpected presence of the King of the Masks.
The priest of San Rosendo de Gondar, a thin and cunning old man with a monastic profile and brown eyes, darkened like those of a wild animal, was returning to his rectory at dusk after the rosary. The solitude of the field, chilled by the winter, was scarcely interrupted by a few bare poplars. The path, covered in dry leaves, floated in the orange mist of the setting sun. There, at the bend, stood an altar of souls, and the collection box intended for alms lay neglected, revealing its empty interior. The rectory stood isolated in the middle of the field, not far from some mills. It was dark, decrepit, and weather-worn, like those old beggar women who seek alms, braving sun and rain, stationed by the side of the royal roads. As night began to fall, with dark signs of snowstorms and rain, the priest walked quickly, displaying his nature as a hunter. He was one of those priests who, after melting down the silver from their churches and sanctuaries to support the cause, offered free masses for the soul of Zumalacárregui, a general who supported the claim of Don Carlos V to the Spanish throne against the ruling Queen Isabella II. Despite his age, he remained resilient. As he entered the sunroom, a guard dog came over to welcome him, wagging its tail in joy. After stroking its neck in greeting, he entered the kitchen just as a lively village girl was setting the table for dinner.
"What are you up to, Sabel?"
"Look, Uncle."
Smiling and slightly flushed from the fire, with a flowered scarf tied at the nape of her neck, had her coarse linen shirt sleeves rolled up, revealing her arms, white as snow, up to above the elbow. Golden like an ear of wheat, soft yet rich like a green blooming branch, the filoas were displayed over the pan, the classic crepes traditionally enjoyed during Carnival in Galicia. The priest eyed them with the greed of an old glutton, and then, sitting on a bench by the warmth of the fire, he took out of his pocket a braid of the blackest tobacco. He pinched it with his fingernail, rubbing the powder between his palms, proceeding with great care. He was still at this task when the persistent barking of the dog, running back and forth and stopping to scratch at the door with his paws, forced him to get up to find out the cause of such a commotion.
"Blasted animal."
"Could he be rabid?"
Sabel murmured, slightly startled.
"Rabid? Nonsense. If he were rabid, he wouldn't be barking like that."
At that moment, a deafening and harsh noise began to play on the path, sounding as if it had escaped from hell. There was a clamor of shells and tambourines, mournful blaring of horns, and the shrill tones of untuned guitars, triangles, and pots. Sabel opened the window, peering into the darkness.
"Well, look at that, it's a masquerade."
As soon as the performers spotted her, they began to howl, leaping and spinning, entering the house with the boldness of those who have their faces covered. There were up to 6 men, smeared like devils, dressed in women's clothes, soldiers' garb, and beggars' rags. They wore black goggles, scraggly hemp beards, old hats, patched capes, filthy damp rags that cast a repulsive smell. They carried a dummy seated on a litter, a simple structure with a wooden chair on poles. The masked dummy was dressed as a king or emperor, with a paper crown and a cane scepter. Its face was covered with a coarse cardboard mask, and the rest of the costume was completed with a white burlap sheet. The priest urged them with rough courtesy to reveal their faces and have a drink. but they refused, mumbling formalities, accompanied by grimaces, genuflections, and grotesque bows. They placed the litter on the ground, removed the poles leaving only the chair, and filled the kitchen with noise, boisterously teasing both the priest and Sabel, who laughed openly and cheerfully despite the commotion. Only the dog, sheltered by the hearth, bared his teeth and barked fiercely. The priest insisted they try the wine from his harvest and eventually grew annoyed. He claimed it was the best wine for 10 leagues around, pure as God made it, without any impurities of spirits, sugar, or dyes. He lit a small lantern, took down a rusty key from the blackened beam where many others hung, and descended the staircase leading to the cellar. From below, he was heard shouting,
Sabel, bring the large jug.
I'm coming, Uncle.
Sabel moved the pan away from the fire, took down the jug, and disappeared into the darkness, which swallowed her like a monster. One of the masked men approached the window and slowly opened it, trying not to make a sound. A gust of wind extinguished the candle, plunging the room into darkness. Only the red glow of the embers and the eerie glint of the dog's eyes were visible as it lazily swayed its tail on the warm stone of the hearth. Suddenly, a deep silence fell. A voice whispered quietly,
"No one's coming."
Another voice.
"Then let's go."
They fumbled for the door and disappeared like shadows. In the cellar's staircase, the footsteps of the guests could already be heard. Sabel, who was coming up first, stopped, afraid to move in the darkness. Through the window, left open by the others, she could see the cloudy sky and the snow-covered path, over which the moon shone faintly and melancholically.
They're gone.
Sabel felt a fear she couldn't explain. The priest, coming up behind her with the lantern, replied jovially,
What rascals, they'll be back.
How could they not come back? There, in the middle of the kitchen, stood the king, grotesque in his immobile solemnity, with his paper crown, cane scepter, white burlap mantle, and the buffoonish face of a cardboard mask. Sabel, now recovered, took a few steps forward and brought the jug to his lips.
Do you want to drink, Sir King?
As she pulled the jug away after a second, the mask slipped down, revealing a yellow forehead and glassy, terrifying eyes.
Holy Mary!
Horrified, the young woman backed away until she hit the wall. The priest scolded her.
What a lady you are.
No, Uncle. But it's a dead man.
She approached, trembling, with that fear of peasant women that drives them to look, to come closer, instead of closing their eyes and fleeing. The priest resolutely pulled off the mask. Then he raised the lantern, casting its light on the motionless and white-masked figure. He fixed him with a gaze of intense, almost ravenous astonishment, his eyes agog with surprise. The lantern in his hand quivered, betraying a nervous tremble, as he whispered in a hoarse, shaky voice.
Do you recognize him, girl?
She replied,
It is the Abbot of Bradomin.
Yes. Tomorrow we will offer mass for his soul.
Sabel trembled with all her limbs and groaned, asking what they would do, lamenting her bad luck, what would become of them if the authorities found out.
Tio, dear uncle, we can warn the mill.
The priest pondered for a moment.
Of all the places, not there. I think I knew the 2 sons of the miller, but we can bury him in the yard, next to the orange trees.
And if the dogs find him, like they did with the servant of the Sobran landowner. Don't you remember?
Well, we can't stay here with him. Is there any gorse?
There is some.
Then the priest went to the window and closed it, setting the latch, and did the same with the door.
Ah, we need to silence that dog. Don't answer anyone who knocks, even if the house collapses. Do you understand?
He took off his cloak and, grabbing a pitchfork, went down to the cellar. Shortly after, he returned with an enormous bundle of gorse and another of straw. He dropped them abruptly in front of Sabel, who was crouched by the fire, moaning with her face pressed against her knees. He ordered her to light the oven. The girl straightened up submissively, still trembling, pale as a ghost. It didn't take long for the flames, with a crackling and popping music of dry wood, to cover the flat, black mouth of the oven. They stretched out, reaching the middle of the kitchen like a burst of flaming breath. Their glowing reflections made the dead man's livid face seem alive. The priest untied him from the frame, and making Sabel step aside, shoved him headfirst into the oven. But since he was rigid, they had to wait for the torso to char so the rest could fit inside. When the feet finally disappeared, pushed by the pitchfork with which the priest stoked the fire, Sabel, almost fainting, collapsed onto the bench.
Oh, our Lord, what a horrible thing to do.
The priest told her that if she drank a glass of wine, she would regain her courage, and to set an example, he brought the jug to his mouth, keeping it there for a good while. Sabel continued to whimper.
They must have killed him to rob him. It couldn't have been anything else. A blessed man who never bothered anyone. As good as bread. As respectful as a high sheriff. As charitable as no other. Holy Virgin. What black hearts. Blessed Mother of the Lord.
Suddenly, she stopped crying, stood up, and with that foresight born of all suspicion, swept away the ashes and covered the black mouth of the oven with her trembling hands. The priest, sitting on the bench, was rolling another cigar and muttered with a grim calm.
Poor Bradomine. May God help you with this baking.
And so they chose the stark path of concealment, reducing the blessed man's body to ashes, a desperate bid for self-preservation in a time of political paranoia where one can be suspected of being against the establishment. But what would you have done in this situation? This story may be over, but the moral dilemma it casts will linger, waiting to snare the next unsuspecting soul in. Bug-eyed Tales.
Thank you for listening to this short story. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe to Bug-eyed Tales for more unforgettable stories. And don't forget to click the notification button so you can stay up to date on all the latest videos and audiobooks from Bug-eyed Tales.